Yvette, without further ado, over to you, and I hope you enjoy this session. As Yvette said, please post in the chat Q&A, and we will look at those questions at the end of the presentation.
Thanks so much, Anina. The presentation should be coming up now, but I wanted to just start. We've had a lot of input this morning. There have been a lot of things being said. So let's just take a moment to just be in our bodies, to feel our own breath for a moment. So maybe you want to just close your eyes, maybe just become aware of your body in your chair, or if you're standing, just become aware of your body in space. Take a breath, and let's be together in this space. And as you have that awareness of your breath, and you open your eyes, have a look at this beautiful photograph. I'm lucky enough to be married to a photographer, so I have some beautiful photographs that I can draw on. Have a look at this photograph. Breathe it in. Have a sense of just coming into this moment. So what I want you to think about to start off with is, do you remember a lesson, an experience of learning that you had that was something really powerful, where you really feel like that lesson has stayed with you to the present day? Do you remember what that felt like? Did you have a lesson like that? Did you have that kind of moment, that kind of peak moment in your learning that you can look back at and go, oh, wow, that was something that I really have kept with me all this time? If you'd like to share some of those ideas in the chat, please feel free to do that. I want to tell you about one experience that I had when I was at school. I was at high school, Pinelands High, in fact, in the 80s. And I had a history teacher who was an exceptional history teacher, who brought us into the room on this particular day and said, we were going to imagine what it was like to be in London during the Second World War. And he prepared the room. The room was blacked out. And he said, I want you to enter into this experience with me. And the next thing, the lights were going out. He'd prepared sound effects. There were the sounds of dropping bombs. There were the sounds of sirens going. And we were all asked to get under our desks. And we got under our desks, and we really felt like we were in that wartime situation. And suddenly his booming voice rang out, and he was telling us one of Churchill's speeches, one of those rousing speeches that made Londoners at those dreadful times feel more secure, feel more safe. And the speech invigorated us. And at the end of that lesson, I felt like I had learned so powerfully about the impact of war. I could understand what the tension and the threat of war was. I could also understand how a leader could make you feel less afraid, could be so powerfully persuasive. And I was really curious to know more. And that was the crucial thing for me. I wanted to know more. I wanted to read about the Second World War. I wanted to study. I wanted to find out whatever I could find out. I've been so moved by that combination of sensory stimuli and the power of performance that I had been able to imagine myself into this situation which was entirely foreign to me, and learning had really begun for me. That for me is a kind of a synergistic experience where the power of the arts in different ways is bringing things together: sound, music, lighting, acting, physical awareness, a sense of space, history, the arts, all coming together to create a powerful experience, a memorable experience, one that has lived with me to this very day. So what do I mean about exploring the power of synergy in the arts? What exactly is synergy? This is kind of my own definition based on the definitions that exist, but maybe slightly tweaked. That it's about bringing together two or more things so that they can interact with one another, they can cooperate with one another, they can become aligned perhaps, or they can become interwoven in order to create something that is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's the important thing, because when it becomes greater than the sum of the parts, it becomes an experience, it becomes memorable. I feel like when we create synergies, we are really generating energy. And this is perhaps one of the most important things that the arts can do for us in learning, is creating, releasing, shaping energy in ways that make us feel healthier, more in touch with ourselves, with one another, and more curious about the world around us. And we've been hearing quite a lot about how that works in some of the other sessions that we've been attending. I also want to think about the motivation for learning. So we talk about pull factors and push factors. And essentially, pull factors are those factors that kind of bring us in with desire, so that our desire leads us towards attaining a certain result. And push factors, on the other hand, are where a desire is to avoid an unwanted result, right? And what we see is that pull factors are far more powerful than push factors, in fact. Pull factors are the things that invite us in to discover our greatness, as Hargrove says. They are emotionally compelling, like that experience I was describing to you. There is a powerful goal that we feel like we've accomplished. But often they are less, we've got to leave room for them, right? We've got to make space for them. We can't dictate them. Push factors are often those things that direct rather than creating space, right? They create dependency, and they can sometimes inhibit creativity. So ask yourself, when you're planning your lessons, how are you working with the young people, with children? Can you use the arts as a powerful pull factor, which can really influence learners' attitudes, not just to learning creative arts, but in fact to learning itself? And we've heard a lot about the statistics after COVID and how so many children have dropped out of our system, and so many children have lost so much of the learning experience. I really feel we need to be using the power of the arts to pull children back towards what the excitement of learning can be, what the joy of learning can be, what the fun of learning can be. And this doesn't need to just be for the children. And one of the things that we see in our Kickstarter Educational Empowerment Program is that, in fact, when we create synergistic experiences, when we create embodied learning experiences, which you can also see described on that slide, it's not just the children who benefit, it's the teachers as well. I want to tell you a quick story. We had a teacher working with us in KwaZulu-Natal who was close to retirement age, and frankly, she was sick of teaching. She felt let down by the system. She was exhausted. She was stressed by all the demands on her. She didn't want to teach the arts. She had never been taught the arts herself. She just felt resistant, and she'd basically been told to come to these Kickstarter workshops, whatever they were, and she was really not happy to be there. But in the process of becoming engaged, of entering into the physical activity of participating in a kind of a synergistic arts experience, she started to discover her own artistry, her own creativity. And she started to feel a shift within herself and within her whole attitude to her teaching. What she also found was that the children and her relationship with the children, that was changing. Children were wanting her to teach them rather than they were being pulled towards her rather than being pushed away from her. She was suddenly in demand, and it completely transformed her teaching experience to the extent that she now doesn't want to retire so long as she can continue to teach the arts. So the arts are tremendously transformative in these ways. But I think what I'm wanting to come to now is, so how do we bring the arts together to create these synergistic experiences that can be so compelling, that can be so memorable? And of course, we are asked to do this specifically in the intermediate phase. And maybe just to quickly look at this slide of Piaget, I think that it's a really useful thing for us to remember. What we were hearing from Lindsay earlier about the why. Our real problem is, what is the goal of education, says Piaget. Are we forming children that are only capable of learning what is already known? Or should we try developing creative and innovative minds capable of discovery from the preschool age onwards through life? In other words, the creation of new knowledges, not just of what is already known. So this is really what we are able to embark on in the creative arts. Now, the way the creative arts was designed in terms of CAPS, we have the foundation phase where we've got little creative arts moments which can be integrated into all learning. So it was really felt that creative arts should be method as well as being experienced for its own sake within that foundation phase period. Then as we move into intermediate phase, we have these two streams, as you know, performing arts, visual arts. And then in senior phase, we choose our art forms. We're now doing 2 specific art forms. And then there's the opportunity, if you're lucky enough to be in a school where this is offered, of potential specialization at the FET level. So that was how the CAPS was designed. But I think that there is unfortunately an unintended consequence of this design. And that is that in this intermediate phase, where we have the opportunity for integration, many teachers choose to be looking already towards senior phase, and to perhaps they feel more comfortable in one art form than another, and often there is a neglecting of one or other of the art forms as a result. Now, that isn't the way they were intended to be done. I mean, I know this, Nina and I were working on the creative arts CAPS together. So it was very intentional. That was meant to be an integrated experience of the arts. And we wanted children to be able to have a kind of a 360-degree experience, which would draw on all the different strengths that different individuals have. So that if a child doesn't feel particularly strong in one art form, the other art form is there to support. There's always an entry point. In other words, integration is also about inclusivity. Now, of course, one way of creating the integration is in fact within the topics themselves. And you know how the topics work. The one seems to lead into the next, which leads into the next. And this is the way we tend to look at it, that it's a kind of a cycle. You know, we warm up and play, and what skills are we using in that warm up and play? How can we implement those skills in our improvise and create? And then how can we refine those skills in our read, interpret, and perform? And then how can we think about those when we are appreciating and reflecting? But I'd like to challenge you to think of it not just as a cycle. It's also an interconnected web. As we're warming up and playing, how are we appreciating and reflecting? As we are improvising and creating, what reflection is needed in that moment? And how is our improvise and create leading towards our read, interpret, and perform? So moving between the topics and creating those interconnections between the topics is also a very important way of building integration into a lesson. But for many teachers, what they'll do when they look at the topics is they will create, in a sense, a kind of a thread through, which is discipline specific. So for example, they'll do dance warm-up activities, which lead into some dance improvise and create with movement sentences, which lead into some dance performance, which then allows us to think about dance vocabulary, for example. Now that's very logical. There's nothing, and in many ways, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Of course, it all connects, but there is a danger here. There's a certain mechanistic quality about it, in the sense that we are moving through a series of activities in a particular art form, and we're not allowing what happens in other art forms to influence and interact with what we're doing. So how do we actively look for and create synergies? And I think that the important ingredient that we really need to be adding at this point is, of course, imagination. Because when the topics were written, they were written as openly as possible to give teachers as much opportunity to take them in different directions as could be allowed, you know? So we've got to bring in that ingredient of imagination, and we'll talk about how we do that. The other element that we need to be aware of is the fact that the arts are always an encounter between who is engaging in the arts experience, whether that's as a performer or as an audience member. Everybody in the arts classroom is engaging in that arts experience. And what they are bringing, the knowledge that they're bringing, the context that they're coming from, all of that is co-authoring the arts experience. So there's a synergy that's happening here as well, which will make every lesson that you do, even if you're doing exactly the same lesson plan as you did, last year or you did with a previous class, different, because you are working with a different combination of people. There is that live encounter in which everyone is being asked to co-author this arts experience by responding from their own perspective and their own life experience. So let's think about how we can find synergy then. Synergy is always, as I said, about bringing things together in unexpected ways. And when we have synergy, we often release creativity. I love this image because it speaks to that so beautifully. And in fact, it also reminds me, yesterday we had a beautiful moment in the Spiel workshop where we were asked to create shapes with our hands. And I remember our facilitator creating that very shape. So, but look how beautiful that shape is. Look how that shape makes you both see the bird and see how the bird is being created, right? It's almost playing a trick with your mind in terms of the way it's bringing two different things together. And this is the kind of thing that the arts do for us all the time. They allow us to see the world differently. They bring imagination into the space. So I think that there are some simple ways that we can start to look for synergy. Identify common recurring elements across the art form. So when you're looking at the caps, do you see a certain word popping at you this term, right, as you're planning your term? For example, there's a term in which the word conflict keeps on popping up. There's conflict in music, conflict in dance, conflict in drama. How can we use that recurring element as something that is linking things together? Or can we find a holding story? Can we find a story that somehow contains enough richness that we can keep referring back to it through the various art forms? Or does this particular term suggest an overarching theme of some kind? Or perhaps there's a theme that is naturally emerging or that is within the children's curiosity right now that feels important? Or can we be linking the arts into other subjects, right? Is there a connection that we want to be making with other subjects right now that might allow us to find synergy? And then finally, performance, because performance is always about synergy. If you think about a theatre performance, it uses all the art forms simultaneously. But even if we were only performing a music piece, we still have to shape space. We still have to think about how we arrange the classroom. We still have to think about the visual elements of how we present our music performance. So performance always allows for synergy. So I want to look quickly at the caps themselves, and I'm afraid that's terribly small, but I wanted to just point out to you that, for example, rhythm. Rhythm is a great example of a recurring element that can create synergy across a term. Grade 4 term 1, grade 5 term 1, check out rhythm. But let's look at one where it's less obvious. There isn't a single thing which is popping. So this is, I think this is from grade 5 term 3, I think. But basically what we've got here is we've got some mime elements. We've also got some locomotor, non-locomotor movement. And we seem to have activities which are almost of equal amounts of time if we were to look at them. There's not one thing which is obviously dominant in this particular term. Now, I'm going to just give you 2 examples of how to approach this particular one. So one would be, can we start with a story that links all these things together? A story I love is a story called The Smell Thief, which has a really mean, wealthy baker who's baking all this delicious bread and croissants and things, and a poor woman who he accuses of stealing his smells, right? So that's the basic thing. Now that creates such a wonderful frame for engagement. The act of baking can be turned into all those locomotor, non-locomotor movements. There are so many opportunities for mime in that story. There are also so many opportunities for finding contrasts in terms of ways of moving because of the characters that are involved in the story. So that story could become something that we keep on moving back to. But another way to approach the same work, the same term, would be to think about perhaps the theme of elements. Elements are so wonderful because they provoke different moods and emotions. And think back to the water photograph I was showing you at the beginning. Water has so many different qualities to it, right? It can be soothing, gentle, flowing, rhythmical. But then we compare that to something like fire, which is so volatile, so energetic, potentially threatening, overwhelming. We've got some really contrasting ideas. So if we, in our lesson plan, keep returning to this idea of elements, we could be in the mime, exploring miming actions using the elements, you know, digging earth, rolling rocks, pouring water, whatever it is. And in the locomotor, non-locomotor movements, we could also be exploring the qualities of the element in those movements. And so we start to build a kind of a frame within which everything is being held. But what's important about this is it is sparking the imagination. And maybe that's the central point, is that we're not just simply going for the activity, right? It's not just about, I want you to move in particular ways, but what does that movement make you feel? What does that movement connect to? Because ultimately what we want when all of these things come together is we want a peak experience. So a peak experience is where something, a little bit like that history lesson I was describing to you, is deeply moving, it's exhilarating, it's elevating, right? And you can see there all the elements of what a peak experience feels like. Someone will be entirely in the moment. They'll feel uninhibited. They'll feel free of self-criticism, etc. I think a central question for us to ask ourselves is, how do we create peak experiences in the classroom for our learners? It may not be in every lesson. Maybe we are moving towards the creation of a peak experience, and that could be our performance. But those peak experiences are the keys to unlocking a love of learning, a love of lifelong learning. And to get to that peak experience, perhaps these are some of the ideas that you want to think about. Is it inclusive? Is it immersive? Is it intimate? Does it make each child feel like they are involved? Is it inspirational? And is it imaginative, right? So those are some of the key things to look for if you're wanting to build a peak learning experience. And of course, performance can always give us that, whether it's watching a performance as an audience member or whether it's being part of a performance, it gives us that sense of a peak experience. So that's really what I wanted to say. I hope that you'll find some of these ideas useful, that you'll find a way to create a structure for a learning program that really fully engages the learners using synergies, which have the impact of pull factors, which bring learners deeply into the learning process and which give them peak experiences.
Thank you, Yvette. Well, I have to say that this presentation was a peak experience for me. Thank you for finding ways to show us how to build synergy in, seemingly easy ways. You made it easy for us because it can be really daunting when you look at, as she showed us an extract from the CAPS and you confront it with the text and you have to find ways. So this presentation is really valuable for me, and thank you for guiding me and for providing us with a peak experience. I wish we had more time because we could really speak for a long time. And I will make it my business to ask you again to do a workshop with us. We'll have to invite all our other delegates to come to the Western Cape and to see what Yvette has on offer. Colleagues, we are ending this session now. We have a 10-minute break. And then after that, we are going into another set of workshops where we are going to explore Indigenous dance, visual art, and kami. And we are asking you to be back at 12:20. for the next set of workshops. After that, we have a final presentation that is bound to be incredibly inspirational, where we are going to look at how science and the arts are integrated. And Dr. Wendy Taylor is going to speak about her work that she is doing, to bring about learning in the creative peak experience in science learning through the arts. And then after that, it is the prize giving. So please stay tuned, because you don't want to miss the highlight of this program, where we are going to look at the prizes. But for now, grab a cup of coffee. And Yvette, thank you again.
Thank you.
It was absolutely fantastic. Yeah, we can do with more of this, and please continue asking questions. Yvette will gladly answer those questions for you. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a fantastic